Now, if we were to play, we do have our character. I mean, we don't even see it, but we don't have any input set up. So I kind of want to get started with some input. So let's go out of the editor. We can save it, doesn't really matter. We only added that one cube. So to add input, we have to map keys to functions. So in order to do that, we have to go to our setup player input component. And the first thing I want to do is I want our character to move forward. Now to do that, we just call player input component, which is one of the variables that's passed in into this function. And we have two options. The first one is bind action. The other one is bind axis. In this case, we're interested in bind axis. And the reason for that is because we want to be able to move both forward and backwards, where forwards would be 1 and backwards would be -1. This is best visualized if you think about it from a gamepad perspective, where if you don't touch your thumbsticks, the input is 0, and you can slowly increment the value from 0 to 1 if you move it forward, and from 0 to -1 if you were to move it backwards. That's kind of what this function lets us do. And in the case of a keyboard, it's really just, did you press your key? Yes or no. So it's like W pressed, yes, then it would be 1. And if it's no, then it would be 0. So first of all, what we need is we need to specify a name that we need to bind it to. So I'm just going to call it move forward, and I'll show you in the UI in 1 second what that means, because this still isn't a key. We still didn't assign it to a W. That's something we'll do in a second in the project settings. But for now, we'll call this move forward, and you have to remember that name because we'll have to assign that. User object is just whoever owns this input. It's just going to be this, which is our character. And then this really long T-based delegate, it just means pass in the function. Pass in the function that you want to have trigger when we have our key pressed. So we're going to make a new function for that. So let's specify character, and this will be the function that we'll have to make. We haven't made this yet, so let's create that in our header file. So let's just make move forward, and because we're binding to bind axis, one thing we kind of just have to know is it will provide us with a value. That's the value from 0 to 1 and from 0 to -1. Let's create an implementation for that. We have two more things to do before we have our inputs set up complete. The first one is, once this function gets called, we need to actually pass along this information. Now, again, luckily, because character class already takes care of all the hard stuff. So we just need to say in what direction we want it to move. And for that, we have a add movement inputs. That's a function that's in the character. And this will pass it along to that character movement component that's already added for us in this character class. We just need to pass in a direction. Now, directions work in vectors, but basically we just are pointing in a certain direction. That's the direction we want to move in. And for now, I just want to get the simplest 4 directions. So we have a function for that. We can just call getActor forward vector. That is literally just a vector that returns a vector that is just pointing in whatever direction our actor is currently looking. And as the scale, we can just pass in value. That's, again, the value from -1 to 1. And what this does is, like I said, this will just pass along to the character movement component, and that will take care of the rest for us. So now there's only one more step missing. That is, we haven't actually bound any key. We haven't bound the W key to actually trigger that function. So we'll launch the editor, and then I'll show you how to do that. So okay, we're back in the editor. Now what we do is we go to Edit, Project Settings, and then we have a whole bunch of settings, but we're interested in the input category. And then we have, again, the action mappings and axis mappings. This is where the actual last bit of magic happens. We can just click the plus, and now we need to pass in a name. That's that name that we just specified in code, which is the move forward. And then here we can specify the key that needs to trigger it. So that is going to be our W key. In the case of keyboard, what we can do is we can also pass in the S key, the move back key, and just pass in a scale of -1. So we click this plus again here, and we pass an S. then, and then we specify -1. Now that will pass in the code. If we just quickly hop back here, that will pass in a value of -1. So that is basically the opposite of the forward vector. So that will move it backwards. So with this setup, I think we should already have our first movement working. Oh, actually, we didn't load in the level. So we make sure we actually load in our test level again. We were using the default pawn again. So now we have our first little bit of movement. It's not much. It's not very visceral yet, but at least we have the very first bit of movement set up. So now whenever we press the W key, we'll go forward, press the S key, we'll go backwards. There is kind of like one more thing that I would like to do, actually two things. The first one is turning. I just want to make sure that we have set up at least one more function. So we can go back into the code and we'll bind another axis. And in this case, we can once again rely on already a lot of the boilerplate that's being done for us by just binding to an existing function. So this one I'm going to call turn. We'll pass in this again. And in this case, we can actually directly, at least for now, we're probably going to change this. Like I said early on, game code will change. But for now, we can just directly bind to a function that's already available in our pawn. Add, it was something like controller yaw input. And yaw is horizontal. Well, pitch is, of course, up and down. This will let us turn. And if you're curious, you can just control click on that. Hopefully it's, you get IntelliSense. One problem with Unreal Engine is that it's 8 million lines of code. So sometimes you'll need to give Visual Studio a little bit of time to catch up because it won't always be so fast. Actually, let's see here. This is basically what that function does. We don't really have to worry about it. The only thing that it does is it just adds yaw as input. And if you're not sure about what pitch, yaw, and roll mean, don't worry. Basically, yaw is like the horizontal rotation, pitch is the vertical rotation, and roll is this. So think of it as an airplane where you would roll, pitch, and yaw. The final thing that we need to do here, though, is we did specify turn, but we didn't actually bind it. So I want to just quickly dive back into our project settings again, and we're still in input. And we want to make another axis mapping. In this case, we're going to call it turn. And we'll bind it to mouse X, which is the horizontal movement of the mouse. And with that, I think the only thing we need to do is compile, because we didn't compile the code yet. And since it's a small change, I will compile from the editor, which should be really fast. And then if we play, we actually have our first rotation set up. So now we have a little bit of our first two inputs set up.